What's up, Yinzers, Yinzettes? Welcome back to the Puck Snap podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kelsey Surmacz from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Kelsey_Surmacz4 on Blue Sky. Same thing without the underscore, and all social media platforms. Just search my name. You should be able to find me. You can also read my work on the Hockey News. As you might notice, I'm running it solo today. Hannah could not make it for this episode, so I'm going to do the best I can with you folks, but I do want to just give you a rundown kind of what we're going to be talking about this week. So obviously, all things considered, it's been a pretty good few days for the Penguins post-trade deadline. We are going to talk some trade deadline near the end of the show. I kind of want to end it with that, but we're going to talk a little bit about the hot goaltending streak that Tristan Jarry's on, as well as the captain Sidney Crosby doing Sidney Crosby things. And we'll also give you a little bit of a prospect update because the baby pens are red hot down in Wilkes-Barre right now. So like I said, non-traditional episode here. I'm going to do the best I can, and I probably won't keep you for very long, being that, it's just me talking into a microphone. So feel free to give any feedback you want. I'd appreciate some support, but if it's terrible, that's okay too. I'm doing my best here. So yeah, let's just go ahead and kick it off with the week in review. So basically, the NHL trade deadline was Friday the 7th. A lot happened. Like I said, we'll get to that later. There's a lot of roster turnover for the Penguins. So we'll kind of delve into those moves a little bit later. But I do want to talk about the games because on that deadline day, they did play the Vegas Golden Knights the same evening as the trade deadline. They were shut out 4-0 that night. And, it was one of those things. You could tell that I think the weight of the day was affecting the Penguins. They actually started off pretty well in this game. They came out, played pretty hard. And then honestly, after they couldn't finish in that first period, Vegas's talent just took over. And this is one of those moments where you really, really saw that Vegas is simply a much better hockey team than the Pittsburgh Penguins are right now. So yeah, their talent took over. Tanner Pearson gets a goal in the first period. Ivan Barbashev adds one in the second. And then Brandon Saad, Mark Stone both score in the third period to kind of seal the deal on that one. Alex Nedeljkovic gets the start there. And it wasn't a terrible start, but not Alex Nedeljkovic's best start. His struggles kind of continue, since the Four Nations break. Because as you know, before the Four Nations break, Nedeljkovic was on a little bit of a tear. But we're kind of seeing him regress to the mean again. So we'll see how that goes. But, in response to that game, the Penguins did play the Minnesota Wild on Sunday. It was also their last contest against Penguins legend Marc-Andre Fleury. What a career for 29. And it was nice to see, the guys get to play him one last time. And they did pretty well, as did their own netminder, Tristan Jarry. For those of you that have been living under a rock and don't know what's been happening this season, which if you're here, I doubt that's the case, but we'll go over it anyway. Tristan Jarry obviously had a really rough start. He was sent on a conditioning stint down to the AHL back at the beginning of the season. And then he did come back up, had a run of games. Again, didn't perform super well. And he was waived on January 15th. And then once he was waived, he cleared. He was reassigned to Wilkes-Barre Scranton. Got a little bit of, run of games there. And with the Four Nations break, he was recalled to the NHL club. Joel Blomqvist was sent back down to the AHL just to get some games over the break. But then, Joel Blomqvist struggled in his second stint. He was pretty good in his first stint with the Penguins, but 903 save percentage through that first stint, but never really quite figured it out in his second stint. So Jarry was recalled again. And hey, this game against Minnesota, I mean, we'll talk about the Vegas game on Tuesday in just a second here, but that was quite a performance from Tristan Jarry against the Minnesota Wild on Sunday. He stopped 29 of 30 Minnesota shots. There were several times he was making key saves and key moments. And this really looked like the Tristan Jarry, the all-star version of Tristan Jarry, the two-time all-star version of Tristan Jarry. And we haven't seen this version of Jarry this late in the season, especially in recent campaigns. So yeah, it was a nice win for him. We'll get more to him in a second, but this one started off pretty evenly. The Penguins were getting a lot of chances. It was kind of back and forth for a while. Jarry kept it in a deadlock. Fleury kept it in a deadlock. Then finally, a little under 5 minutes into the second period, Evgeny Malkin finally broke the no score with a power play goal. And that's his 13th of the season. And, that was the only goal in the second period. And the third period was much of the same. I mean, this game was a really exciting one. A really, like I said, back and forth trading chances. And then in the third period, the captain called game. So Sidney Crosby registers his 20th of the season midway through the period before Ryan Hartman did add a power play goal a few minutes later to make it 2-1. But then, as we've seen many a time on Sidney Crosby and empty nets, he has some of the craziest empty net goals out there. I mean, remember the bank one a couple years ago where he banked it off the boards and then he pretended to, just brush it off and say he didn't mean to do that. But everybody knows he meant to do that. And we've seen him score from 200 feet. Well, this one was chalked up a little bit different. He, was in a foot race with Brock Faber, and he beat Brock Faber to the puck. He kind of used his body to get positioning, and then with one hand on his stick, he just flung it into the net from the left circle. So really, really impressive stuff from Sid in this game. He's another person we'll get to more in just a second here. But it was nice to see the Penguins kind of just hunker down, get this win, and also to see Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby both score on Marc-Andre Fleury one last time. Gino actually jokingly apologized after the game, so that was pretty fun to see. But what a career, Marc-Andre Fleury. It's going to be pretty sad not to see him between the pipes against the Penguins anymore, but best of luck, Flower, in your retirement for the rest of the season. You're a legend in Pittsburgh, so good luck. And there was a lot of that sentiment expressed after the game by the guys as well. So moving on, we're going to talk about Tuesday a little bit. So they did get that rematch with the Vegas Golden Knights. They obviously lost Friday on trade deadline day. Then they got a home rematch with the Golden Knights. And, I mean, again, the stories of this game were Sidney Crosby and Tristan Jarry. And as good as Jarry's performance was against the Wild, man, oh man, was this an impressive performance by Tristan Jarry. Especially late in the game, Vegas absolutely peppered Tristan Jarry. They had 19 shots in the third period, and Jarry let one by him with 6 seconds remaining. So overall, they had 37 shots on goal. Jarry only let in 2. Penguins win this one 3-2 in overtime. So Sidney Crosby in the first period scores a power play goal to get his 22nd of the season. As we've seen many a time, he got down on one knee, and Rickard Rakell fed him a beautiful, perfect pass for him to kind of backdoor pass for him to put home. So Crosby puts it home backdoor, gets down on one knee, power play goal. And then Crosby also scored at the beginning of the second period. Again, nice play by Rakell on this one. I don't think this was talked enough about enough on this goal. But Rakell was kind of made a nice play on the wall to get the puck to Crosby. Crosby just walks right in, picks his spot. He throws a puck on net, slides underneath the pads of Samsonov, and voila. Second goal for Crosby, 23rd of the season, and 4th in 2 games if you're keeping track. So really, really good stuff from the captain. You also saw in the second period, if you watch the game, again, as we've seen many times, Sidney Crosby putting his football, not soccer, folks, football skills to use. There was kind of a puck along the defensive blue line, and Crosby lost his stick. He uses his skates to literally just play the puck to the wall. Then he goes to the wall and wins a puck battle on the wall without a stick and squirts it out of danger and to Penguins possession. It was just really incredible stuff by Sid on Tuesday night. And that was basically the definition of the captain carrying the team on his back, because quite literally, he and Jarry carried the team on their backs. Pavel Dorofeev did get a power play goal at the end of the second to make it 2-1. And cut that lead in half. And then, as I said, Jarry kept them alive in this third period. The Penguins did not play particularly well, especially in the back half of this game. And Jarry was the reason that it got to overtime in the first place. He did let in that Noah Hannafin goal with 6 seconds left, goalie pulled. Wasn't really anything he could do on that one. There was a screen. So not much you can do there. But then in overtime, Evgeny Malkin lays a perfect pass to Erik Karlsson, waiting in the right circle. He picks his spot, puts it home. Penguins get the win. Again, team didn't play particularly well, but this was still a nice win for them. And a really nice couple of wins for Tristan Jarry. Say what you want about Jarry and say what you want about, I saw a lot of this sentiment about him ruining the tank job and, you can't win with Jarry, quote unquote. But listen, guys, and same goes for Sid here. Yes, theoretically and just logically at this point, it is probably the best thing for the Penguins, who are not going to make the playoffs unless by some miracle every single team above them who has games in hand on them, all of a sudden fall off, decide to start losing almost every game. The Penguins win every game. It's not going to happen. But even if things look bleak from the outside and, as analysts, as writers, as fans, you can say what you want about what's best for the team, because I think that's a pretty clear sentiment at this point. Something you can't do is tell those guys in the locker room to stop winning. They're not going to do that. You can't go to Sidney Crosby and say, hey, we got to tank the rest of the year. Cut it out. You can't go to Tristan Jarry with the kind of season he's had and say, hey, buddy, These guys want to win. At the end of the day, they're playing at the highest level of professional hockey. And they care about winning hockey games. And that's something you can't, expect guys to let up on. And especially not a guy like Jarry, who, as I said, this has been a whirlwind season for him. He's been up and down between the AHL and NHL. Nothing short of a nightmare, really, for Jarry. And for him to come out and have these 2 games and really just kind of make a statement that, hey, I'm still here. This guy's playing for his NHL career. His NHL career is on the line. You can't expect a guy to just call it quits. So, regardless of what happens the rest of the season, I think it's a pretty commendable thing what Jarry's doing these last 2 games, and also what their captain's doing. Don't forget, Sidney Crosby is 10 points away from beating Wayne Gretzky's all-time point-per-game seasons record at 20. Gretzky has 19. They're currently tied, and they have 15 games left. Crosby has 10 points in his last 7 games, and that's including 5 goals. 5 goals, 10 points in the last 7 games. Folks, he ain't slowing down. As long as Sidney Crosby's on this hockey team, he's going to fight till the bitter end. If they're mathematically eliminated, he's going to fight to the bitter end. You can't take the fight out of Sidney Crosby. So yeah, if you look at everything in a vacuum and just, yes, the Penguins probably should be losing games, but you can't ask those guys in the locker room to lose games. So Tristan Jarry, Sidney Crosby, really, really spectacular this past week. So kudos to them. They're both kind of taking the reins and really driving the bus for this team the last couple games. And we'll see, what happens over these next couple weeks. But just want to transition a little bit. So we got to talking about Sid and Jarry. They're red hot. They deserve talking about. But a couple other guys that are red hot is the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Baby Penguins. In case you haven't, been keeping up with Wilkes-Barre, this is a really good team, guys. I mean, they're on fire down there. And when I say that, I mean they're one of the best teams in the AHL. They're making a legitimate run for the Calder Cup this season. And if you take that kind of and mirror it with the Penguins situation, it should give you a lot of hope for the future. You know what I mean? I'm not saying they don't really have any blue chip prospects, so to speak, but I do think there's some legitimate complementary pieces that they do have down in Wilkes-Barre. So yeah, we can talk about that a little bit. I just want to kind of give you a brief update, especially on, two guys everyone's watching really closely. So the first is Rutger McGroarty. And I mean, if you've been paying attention again to Penguins hockey or if you're a Winnipeg Jets fan, I don't know why a Winnipeg Jets fan would be listening to the Pucks and At podcast, but we're talking about Rutger McGroarty. So maybe they'll jump on for an episode, but so McGroarty made the team out of training camp. He played 3 games with the NHL club before getting sent back to the AHL. And it was a really slow start for him. He only had 1 assist in his first 8 games. But honestly, since then, he admitted that it did take a little bit of time to adjust to the pro game. But once that adjustment hit, I mean, for anyone that's been watching this guy all season, the process has been there. You can tell that he's a very high IQ player. He sees the ice really well. He's always in the right position. He doesn't shy away from physicality. He goes to the net. He knows exactly where to be to make plays and also to create space, both for himself and his teammates. So this is a very high IQ player. And he was a very snake-bitten player for a long time. We didn't see the production catch up until recently. Because if you've been paying attention, Rutger McGroarty is on an absolute tear down in Wilkes-Barre Scranton right now. So yeah, let's just talk about that for a second. So Rutger McGroarty, he had a goal tonight. I think that game's still ongoing. They're playing the Hershey Bears tonight, who are still above them in the Atlantic Division in the AHL. But McGroarty has 7 goals and 15 points in his last 13 games. And I'm actually going to check on that right now because I do want to make sure that that's still accurate. We've had a few more goals since then. So just going to check this out. Yeah, so went to a shootout tonight. All right, so yeah, Rutger McGroarty, 1 goal in the night. So yeah, he has 7 goals, 15 points in his last 13 games. So things are going really well for Rutger McGroarty right now in Wilkes-Barre Scranton. As I said, the production wasn't quite there at the beginning of the season. The process was always there. But we're finally starting to see that production catch up. And just holistically, he still has pretty good stats. I mean, especially for the slow start that he had. He has 13 goals, 36 points in 54 games this season. So we're really starting to see this guy come around. And when I say this guy should be a pretty decent top 6 player, I really do still believe that. I think he is going to be a substantial part of the Penguins' future. And he has a lot of great intangibles too. His leadership qualities are, it's impressive. So Rutger McGroarty, doing really well right now. And another guy who everyone's keeping an eye on is Ville Koivunen. And Koivunen also had a goal in tonight's 5-4 shootout win for Wilkes-Barre. He has 20 goals, 54 points in 56 games on the season. And let me remind you, this guy's an AHL rookie. He's a rookie, and he leads rookies in points. I mean, I think a lot of people, I don't want to say overlooked Koivunen as part of the Jake Gensel trade, but I do kind of think that that's what's happened. I mean, this guy's body of work in, his first professional season, it's hard to ignore. And, everybody should keep their eyes on McGroarty. Tristan Jarry has had a good year as well. Sergei Murashov, goaltender, he's having a spectacular season in both the ECHL and the AHL. But it's really impressive how quickly Koivunen has adapted to the professional game. And, he has 5 goals and 16 points in his last 11 games. So just like McGroarty, he's really driving the bus down there on offense. And the more and more I watch this guy, man, I think the Penguins might really have something here. Now, something I will say, he does get knocked around a little bit. He does have to bulk up a little bit, add some weight. And I think, even Jason Spezza said this, during practices over the Four Nations break. They like what they've seen from Koivunen. They like the progress he's made. They are looking for him to still round out some of the details of his game. So, all that is part of the development for a young player. But it's very encouraging to just see this guy's skill level on display. He's also a very underrated playmaker. And again, just like McGroarty, like his vision's insane. I mean, his playmaking smarts are really legitimate. So, if you're looking for some silver lining to a really abysmal Penguins season so far, turn on the AHL stream. Watch the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins play some hockey because, like I said, this is a good team. And just for the record, I mean, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins have never won the Calder Cup. They're 31-16-7-1. They've scored more goals than any other team in the AHL. So it's really impressive what's happening down there. If you do get the chance to catch any games in person, if you get the chance to, like I said, hit up the AHL stream, do it. Because you're not going to want to miss what some of these guys are doing down there, because some of these guys will be on this roster next season in some capacity. And I didn't even mention Vasily Ponomarev. He's having a good year down there as well. And, him and Owen Pickering, I think I know a lot of people are clamoring for these guys to, be on the NHL roster at some point by the end of the season. And I'm not trying to, throw a damper on everybody's hopes, dreams, and expectations, but I would not expect that before the end of the season. If anything, barring injuries, etc., we saw that the Penguins recalled Matt Nieto and Sebastian Aho on an emergency basis this week. So if that gives you a clue to what their plan is, that should tell you all you need to know. I wouldn't expect these younger guys to come up this season because, look, they're building something together. They're winning together. They're, trying to accomplish something that the AHL team for the Penguins, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, have not accomplished yet. And that's win the Calder Cup. So it's important for them to be in that kind of environment and play for something meaningful. and play meaningful games at this time of year. And they're doing it together as a unit. So if anything, you may see, Owen Pickering up, maybe Vasily Ponomarev, basically some of these guys that we've already seen, and who are probably, a little bit ahead of those other guys in terms of development. And I do expect both of them to probably be on the NHL roster to start next season. But let the kids play, just let them work towards something together, win together. And hopefully, next season, 2026, 2027, when these guys are starting to make an impact, they can bring some of that winning culture up to Pittsburgh. And that's obviously the hope. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the trade deadline stuff. But a couple other moves this week I did want to mention too before I transition to the trade deadline, because it was very busy. So we probably should recap it and just kind of discuss what the outlook is. So Ryan Shea defenseman Ryan Shea was extended for one season at $900,000 AAV. So we will see Ryan Shea in black and gold again next season. And honestly, that's pretty well deserved. He was playing really good hockey as of late until his week-to-week injury. That knocked him out of the Vegas game on Tuesday. And as I said, he's week-to-week. So he'll probably, hopefully, be able to play again this season. But he was playing very well before that injury. Also, a couple prospects signees. So Daniel Lotch got signed to a 2-year entry-level contract. He's a defenseman, as well as Chase Pietola. I think I'm pronouncing that right. He signed his 3-year entry-level deal with the Penguins this past week as well. And Pietola actually was also just named the CCHA's Defensive Defenseman of the Year. So congrats to him. The Penguins have pretty good defensive depth in their system, but they really could use a few shutdown guys for sure. So, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say these guys have the NHL in their futures, but defensive depth is always good. The development for defensemen is always very volatile. It takes defensemen longer to develop, longer to reach their peak potential. So the more defensive prospects the Penguins have, the better. And they have a lot right now. So that's a really good thing to see out of this organization, because obviously you have Pietola, you have Lotch, you have Pickering, you have Pieniniemi, you have Brunick, you have Harding. So they have some legit talent on their blue line, in the system now. So congrats to Pietola, congrats to Lotch, very well deserved. They're both having good seasons. But anyway, let's move on to this trade deadline, because a lot has happened this season. And if you are keeping track, Dubas made 8 trades this season in total, if we're going back to the Lars Eller trade back in November. So let's talk about this for a second, because this was definitely a huge point of discussion this past week. Dubas obviously had a big presser, after the trade deadline, which we'll talk about once we go through some of the moves and some of the not moves. So just a recap on Dubas's season in the trade market. They traded Lars Eller back in November to Washington for a 2025 5th-round pick and a 2027 3rd-round pick. Back on January 31st, they dealt Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor to the Vancouver Canucks for Dan Heinen, Vinny Desharnais, forward prospect Melvin Fernstrom, and a conditional first that was given to them by the Rangers in the JT Miller trade. Then we get to around the deadline, the week of the deadline, and we saw a lot of action. So Dubas actually did manage to flip Vinny Desharnais to the San Jose Sharks for a 2028 fifth-round pick. Michael Bunting and a fourth-round pick in 2026 were dealt to Nashville for forward Tommy Novak and defenseman Luke Schenn. I do want to pause here for just a second because I do want to say that I don't think too many people expected the Bunting trade. I know I certainly didn't. There, wasn't too heavy of an indication that, he was super, super on the block in comparison to some others. And he was a really popular guy in the locker room. Really fun guy to talk to, too. Really good interview. So, good luck to Michael Bunting in Nashville. Hope you do well over there. If you're listening, Michael Bunting, which I doubt, but best of luck to him. But I do think that the Penguins are getting a good one in Tommy Novak. Unfortunately, he was injured against the Wild on Sunday. He didn't play on Tuesday, and he is day-to-day with a lower body injury. So hopefully we'll get to see more of Tommy Novak this season. Pretty similar production to Michael Bunting. He's a center. I think this guy is a pretty decent option for third-line center, at least, in the near term for the Penguins. Or he can, slot in the top six if needed as well. The skill is definitely there. It's one of those things, and it's the same thing with Philip Tomasino. You'd like to see a little bit more detail in his game. But I like what I've seen so far in a really short sample. So that happened, Wednesday, last Wednesday, a couple days before the trade deadline. And then we get to deadline day. And we saw Anthony Beauvillier, who is having a solid campaign. He was rewarded for it. He got traded to the Washington Capitals to join Lars Eller over there. And the Penguins ended up getting a 2025 second-round pick out of that. So great work by Dubas on that one. And also great work by Dubas on this next one because he did manage to flip Luke Schenn to the Winnipeg Jets for a 2026 second-round pick and a 2027 fourth-round pick. And in case you're not familiar with what's been said about this situation, I think Dubas and Sullivan and the Penguins were kind of preparing for Schenn to stay because he did have 1 year left on his contract, and I think they expected him to be in Pittsburgh after the trade deadline. But the story on their end is that Schenn wanted to go to a contender, and he made that clear when the trade happened. So basically, they honored his wish. They sent him to a contender. Best of luck, Luke Schenn. He kind of said a little bit of contradicting things afterwards about just how he, didn't know what was going to happen and kind of insinuated the Penguins were shopping him. Not necessarily that he didn't want to be there, but not going to get too far into that. Either way, Luke Schenn, 35 years old, been there, done that in this league. He's a two-time Stanley Cup champion, and he wants to win again. Can't blame the guy. So he's going to a really good team in Winnipeg, and the Penguins got, 2 picks out of it, and one of them's a second rounder. So masterful work by Dubas. Not sure what Barry Trotz is doing over in Nashville. You'd think that he could have, flipped Schenn himself for a second-round pick and fourth-round pick. But it's obvious that they just really like Michael Bunting, I think. So we'll see how that pans out for them. But couple head scratchers for Barry Trotz in his Nashville tenure, and particularly in dealing with the Penguins organization, because we all remember the trade that sent Philip Tomasino to Pittsburgh for that 2027 fourth-round pick. So couple of head scratchers there. But speaking of Barry Trotz in Nashville, so one of the guys that the Penguins got from Nashville earlier this season was Cody Glass. He was traded to Pittsburgh in the summer. And, the Penguins got 2 picks for him. They got a 2025 third and I believe a 2026 sixth. So, Cody Glass, Jonathan Gruden were sent to New Jersey, the New Jersey Devils, for forward prospect Chase Stillman, forward prospect Max Graham, and a 2027 third-round pick. So, I mean, Dubas turned Cody Glass into 2 prospects, 2 third-round picks, and a 6th-round pick. Not bad work. Not bad work at all. And again, not sure what you're doing, Mr. Trotz. But that one, I mean, the trade for Nashville made sense at the time over the summer. But again, just great asset management by Dubas. And I mean, Jonathan Gruden's not a nothing player either. He was a really valuable player for Wilkes-Barre this season. So it's not like it was just Cody Glass going over there. But if you think about the overall return on Cody Glass, who has done pretty well in a couple games for New Jersey, by the way. He scored a goal. I think he had 2 points yesterday, too. So good for Cody Glass. I do personally want to say that this guy's great. You know, he was one of the friendliest guys in the locker room. If you wanted a really just good conversation about anything, whether it was hockey related or not, you could go to Cody Glass. He'll talk to you. He did like to talk a lot. And I do want to say just a personal anecdote too. Obviously, I'm new to the Penguins beat this year. And I remember the first day of training camp, I walked into the locker room. And, you know, I mean, it's my first day. I was a little nervous and I was just kind of taking it all in and just developing a game plan for what I was going to do that day. And, you know, I'm just kind of walking in and Cody Glass is sitting at his stall. He just says hello to me, introduces himself, and he says, "Hey, come sit down." And, you know, he just sat down, talked to me. We had a conversation about just being new at our jobs. And he talked about how he was nervous for training camp. And I shared that I was nervous because it was my first day on the job as well. I'm with Pittsburgh. So, and then he also later in the season, he, you know, I was doing this story about him and Owen Pickering both growing up in Winnipeg when Winnipeg was brought back as an NHL franchise and just how big of a deal that was for them. So, you know, he was on IR at the time and he went out of his way to do an interview with me. So basically what I'm saying, Cody Glass, great guy, great human, and I wish him all the best in New Jersey. Just a great human all around, and doing, like I said, doing pretty well so far in New Jersey. But Penguins get a good return on Cody Glass, who was kind of you know, performance-wise underwhelming for the Penguins this season. And then finally, their last trade of the day was with Toronto, and they sent a 2027 5th-round pick to Toronto for defenseman Connor, or a 2025 5th-round pick, I'm sorry. Pardon me. To Toronto for Connor Timmins and Connor Dewar. Timmins is a defenseman, a right shot defenseman, more of a shutdown guy, and honestly, a pretty good third pairing shutdown guy. I think, you know, he's a pending RFA. I imagine he's probably somebody the Penguins will want to keep around next season. You know, he's a pretty good 6th, 7th defenseman to have. So I'd like to see kind of what his dynamic is with one of their younger, more prolific offensive blue liners, even Vladislav Kolyachonok, which I didn't even get the chance to talk about, but he's been pretty fantastic in the last couple games, and he was good in the Vegas game on the top pairing alongside Chris Letang. But he is a high-risk defenseman. He really jumps into the play. So I'm kind of curious just to see that dynamic with Timmins and maybe one of those kinds of guys. But anyway, so they get Timmins, they get Dewar. Dewar is basically a bottom 6 guy. He's also a pending RFA. I don't imagine, you know, with the Penguins and the situation that they're in, that he's going to return next year, but never say never. And with the injury to Novak, he did slot in briefly on Evgeny Malkin's left wing against the Knights, but it does look like Dan Heinen suited up next to Malkin and Tomasino at today's practice. So we'll see what happens there. But that's the trade deadline. And if you're keeping track, the Penguins netted 8 picks this season. They netted 8 picks. That's good business by Kyle Dubas. That is good business by Kyle Dubas. And great asset management. The Penguins now have 30 picks in the next 3 drafts, and 18 of those picks come in the first 3 rounds. So guys, they have some legitimate draft capital for these next couple seasons. I'll tell you right now that teams don't draft 30 players. Teams don't draft 18 players in the first 3 rounds. So I imagine, we'll see some movement with some of these picks, which kind of bridges us into, my final segment here, which talks about a little bit of Dubas and just what the plan is, because obviously this season's pretty bleak. As I mentioned before, Penguins are in contention for a lottery pick. It remains to be seen whether or not one Sidney Crosby and one Tristan Jarry decide to take them out of that lottery position. But what's interesting, and perhaps the most interesting news coming out of the trade deadline, was the fact that they did not deal Rutger McGroarty. Obviously, he's a guy that got a lot of, traction as far as trade talk. Matt Grzelcyk was another one. He wasn't dealt, which was a bit surprising to me. But to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if the Schenn situation had a little bit of influence on that, being that it seems like they were planning on keeping Schenn, but once he wanted out, had they shipped Grzelcyk off, they wouldn't have had enough healthy players to field a roster for their game against Vegas. I think Jack St. Ivany was recalled on an emergency basis. I don't know if he would have been there in time. I assume that he would have, but it got a little hairy, and Dubas did say that some teams kicked the tires on Grzelcyk. I heard some similar things, in the days leading up to the trade deadline, as far as interest from some teams. But it just sounds like ultimately there just wasn't a worthwhile price to deal him for. And it kind of makes you wonder. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do this, but I did see, a couple other writers, Penguins writers, have this sentiment as well. It kind of does make you wonder if the Penguins might extend Matt Grzelcyk this summer, and obviously all eyes will be on the situation with Erik Karlsson, which I'll get to in a second. But if they extend him on like a 1 or 2 year deal, that isn't really out of the question. Obviously, Grzelcyk's defensive work leaves a lot to be desired. But I mean, there's no denying how much he's helped the Penguins power play. And he is having a career season offensively, and to be, quite forthcoming, he's kind of earned an extension, whether that's with the Penguins or whether that's a free agent deal elsewhere. He's definitely exceeded expectations this year, I think. So good on Matt Grzelcyk, but they didn't deal Grzelcyk. That wasn't the big story. As I said, Raquel was the big one. And, I understand both sides of this, because it is a very complicated situation. Look, the Penguins are rebuilding, and the jury's out on how long that's going to take. And I'll get to that a little bit in a second here too. But, from what I hear, there were some pretty substantial offers on the table for Rutger. But at the end of the day, Dubas decided to keep him. He decided to keep him around. And I just want to read some of what he said about Rutger, because I think this kind of might give a picture about what the Penguins' timeline might be for their rebuild and just what the game plan is as far as Raquel, because I think this could get a little bit interesting. So he said he's a big part of our program and a big part of our program. I think everyone has seen this year, and he's got a long history of the type of player he is, but we see him every day, the type of person that he is as well. I think when you have players who perform that way on a game in, game out basis that show the ability to respond when things don't go well and then can turn and propel themselves back into being near the top of the league and perform at that level, especially when you have them sign and they want to be a part of the community, they want to be a part of the program, they know the path that we're on, and they want to be a part of helping to bring the team back into being in contention. I would say that you don't just push that out the door because that may be what's wanted. You have to do what's right for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And for us, having Ricard Raquel as part of the Pittsburgh Penguins was definitely the right thing to do as we measured it up against everything. We're happy to have him. He's a big part of what we do. And I know he really wants to be here. And then later in the presser, he also did just add this tidbit as well. He said there was a lot of interest in Ricard Raquel. And then he said, we just decided that based on where we were at, his value to us, the term remaining on his contract, and the way that he's played and the player that he is, it was in the best interest of the team to have him remain. Now, obviously, there's a such thing as GM speak, right? I mean, GMs can say things all the time similar to this to kind of talk up a player and hike up a player's value to his team for a trade in the future. This isn't uncommon. GMs do this a lot. And actually, Dubas kind of did a similar thing with Erik Karlsson. At one point in the presser, he talked up Karlsson as being a big part of the Penguins and, a really good player. That can be GM speak sometimes, and this could very well be Kyle Dubas pumping Ricard Raquel's tires so that, a team in the summer who, needed that score in the playoffs or just missed the playoffs or is looking to take the next step and needs that kind of guy in their top six. Maybe he's pumping his tires to get, that value, because there's no sign that Raquel's slowing down for the rest of the season. He's, assisted on both of Crosby's goals the other night. And he's second on the team in scoring behind only Crosby. So, there's no sign at this point that Ricard Raquel's production is just going to stop this season. He has 56 points in 66 games. He's sitting on 29 goals. He's a little bit snake-bitten in the goal department these last 3 games. But, his career high is 34. He should break that in these next 15 games. But when you really kind of dig into this situation, the Penguins have a ton of picks. Obviously, we've talked about that already. They have a crop of young players in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton that we talked about earlier that are going to make an impact in some capacity next season. And maybe make an impact is the right word, but they're going to see NHL ice at some point next season. And I expect that for Owen Pickering, Vasily Ponomarev, Rutger McGroarty, Ville Koivunen, Tristan Jarry. Obviously, they have goaltending down there, too. They got Philip Larson, Yoel Blomqvist, Sergei Murashov. Guys, they have some people in their system. Again, they might not be blue chip prospects, but these guys are, those peripheral guys that you fill out a roster with that can, be those complementary pieces that you need on a winning team. The Penguins will still need to draft a center at some point, and that could happen this summer. They could draft a center this summer. And depending on how things go next season, they could draft pretty high next season as well. Maybe draft an elite defenseman. Maybe draft another center. My preference would be that they just draft 2 centers because they're going to need 2 centers very soon. And they have, some decent defensive depth. And there's also just some younger defensemen who are pending RFAs or just, in situations on other teams that you might be able to snag one of them for a couple assets. If you really need somebody, but top pairing defenseman would be a good thing for them too. But if you really look at this situation realistically, now I say this with a grain of salt because a lot still has to go right for the Pittsburgh Penguins to be competitive while Crosby is still here. And Dubas reiterated this in his presser again, that the Penguins are doing their best to give these guys one last shot at the playoffs. Now, keep in mind Malkin's contract expires after next season. That doesn't mean he's done playing. I would venture to guess he's probably going to retire, but if anything, if he does continue, he's going to sign probably a pretty low AAV contract, and it's going to be one of those situations where he's signing 1 or 2 one-year deals until he retires. But anyway, taking that aside, again, GM speak is a thing, but if you really put these pieces together, and the Raquel thing fits into this, like I said, those young prospects in Wilkes-Barre that are on the verge should be in the NHL next season at some point. This overflowing draft cupboard, including that, conditional first from the Rangers that is probably going to be theirs this year, but will probably be a mid to late round pick. And the talent that they already have on their NHL roster, it's not inconceivable that this team really could do a quick turnaround for 2026, 2027. And especially if they're able to draft, an elite center and maybe an elite defenseman or 2 elite centers, whatever you want to, throw in there. I think they have enough of those complementary pieces, and they still have Sidney Crosby playing at an otherworldly level. I mean, we've seen this past week. Sidney Crosby has father time on the ground, and he's doing the Captain Morgan pose over Father Time's body right now. Like, Crosby doesn't appear to be slowing down. Age catches up to everybody. But as long as Crosby's playing at a relatively high level, they can hit on, a center in one of these upcoming drafts who will presumably make an impact pretty quickly. Plus all those, periphery complementary players that I'm talking about in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. And then you think about these picks that they have. The cap's going up this summer. The cap's going up big time this summer. And something to keep in mind, too, is that there are teams that are in really, really tough spots. We're talking about the Buffalo Sabres. We're talking about the Anaheim Ducks. These are teams that have been perpetually rebuilding for years, and they have some young talent on their roster, but they're kind of at a point where they need to establish a timeline. They need to establish who they are now, where they want to be, and how long that's going to take. Because they have RFAs this summer. I'm talking about Mason McTavish for Anaheim, center. JJ Paterka, Bowen Byram for Buffalo. Those are pending RFAs, and I'm not putting anything out there that is confirmed. This is literally just me talking. But if those teams don't have a timeline figured out, there's a chance that guys like that might not want to stick around. And with the assets that the Penguins have, they could use those assets for offer sheets. They could use those assets to acquire RFA rights to some of these, players that can really make a difference for them. So if they kind of play it smart, if Dubas plays it smart, if he dabbles in, the offer sheet, the restricted free agency market. Perhaps makes a splash in free agency. I don't know if we should expect that this offseason. I would think that's more of a 2026 offseason move, but something to keep in mind is with the cap going up, free agents are just going to get more and more expensive year by year. And if they did sign a big name free agent this summer, let's even just, it's been put out there into the universe already. So I'll just say Mitch Marner. Even if they signed a Mitch Marner for next season, I don't think it would make that much of a difference to make this team, a legitimate playoff contender in one season. There's just so many other things that they need to do for that to happen. But if they can really hit on some of these picks, have these guys in Wilkes-Barre, the guys that they already have on their roster, all of that married into, a workable roster for the 2026-2027 season, I think this turnaround could be quicker than a lot of people expect. And the reason this relates to Rickard Rakell is because, look, they have all these assets. And I'm not saying they should or shouldn't trade Rakell this summer. I'm pretty split on that. I think there's arguments for both ways. But, Rakell is a 30-goal scorer on a $5 million contract for 3 more seasons. That is going to be really, really sexy to some teams that, need that score at a discount and don't want to pay premium on the free agents market or in the trade market. Or not the trade market, I'm sorry, in free agency, or the RFA market rather. So, it's one of those things. If you take Dubas's comments about Rakell, I'm not necessarily convinced that he is going to be dealt this summer, guys. I think there was a difference in the GM speak between what he said about Erik Karlsson and what he said about Rickard Rakell. Erik Karlsson's kind of sounded like GM speak and that he's going to be shopped this summer. Rickard Rakell's, to me, that kind of sounded like a guy that they plan to keep around. Because, look, if their window is 2026, 2027, if that's when they want to really start making a push again, Rakell will still have 2 years left on his contract. And look, the reality of rebuilds on the fly is that you just can't get rid of everybody. It won't work. It won't work that way. And the Penguins, have a nice core of veterans to kind of usher in this youth movement that they're going to be seeing starting next season. And with this draft and possibly the 2026 draft as well, to have those veterans around as mentors and just placeholders for, those young guys. But also too, once these guys come up, all of a sudden having Rutger McGroarty and Ville Koivunen and maybe a Mason McTavish or JJ Peterka on, your forward unit, in addition to a Rickard Rakell and a Brian Rust, that actually looks pretty good. And that's not even counting whoever they're going to draft, hopefully early in this next lottery draft. So, look, I'm not putting any expectations in your head. That's not the goal here. But based on what Dubas said in his presser and just some context clues here, don't be surprised if Rickard Rakell remains a Penguin. And I think if Rickard Rakell remains a Penguin beyond this summer, that'll give you a pretty good idea of when the Penguins and Dubas expect to compete. And also, if they weren't planning on keeping him around, it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't have just traded him at the deadline. That's all I'm saying. So, definitely something to keep an eye on. Just keep an eye on this timeline. Keep an eye on Dubas, and he's going to have a really busy summer. This summer will definitely tell a lot about where the Penguins think they're at in terms of their timeline and just where they think they're at, in terms of their long-term trajectory as well. So it should be an interesting summer. buckle up, folks. Because, listen, things are bleak now, but it's kind of fun to look forward to the future and just to see what direction this team is going to take. It's a different kind of fun, but we'll see. We'll see if he can pull this off. Jury's out. But that's all I have time for today. I actually stayed on longer than I thought I was going to. It's been a full hour, and I'm sure you're sick of my voice. So, hope I did okay, but I'm just going to give you one final reminder of where you can find me. So again, I'm Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News. You can find my work on the Pittsburgh Penguins site at THN. You can also find me on X at Kelsey_Surmacz4. Trying to be more active on Blue Sky. You can find me there as well at Kelsey Surmacz4 without the underscore. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate you sticking with me. If you're still listening, thank you for listening to me talk for an hour, because I'm not sure I could stand listening to me talk for an hour. So, anyway, thank you, folks. Have a great week. Let's see if Jarry and Sid will pull this team out of the mud, or if they just stay in the mud and get a good draft pick. But, have a good week, guys. Thanks for giving this a listen, making this part of your weekly routine. And Yinzers, Yinzettes, stay out of trouble now.